So this is part 2 of my video on my thoughts over 40 years of running games on how to make my games better. And if you want to see the first 5, you can see them right there. But I thought I'd give you 5 more and see if they're useful to you. Whether you're running like a serious dungeon crawl or a court intrigue game or what have you, it doesn't even matter what it is. At some point as a GM, you're gonna have NPCs that interact with the player characters. And I have found it useful to always give every major NPC a defining trait. That does not mean they all have to have a backstory. That does not mean you have to do like a special voice or an accent or anything like that. It just means that each NPC should have some kind of defining trait, mostly for you, the GM, to be able to grab onto, to latch onto, to know how to portray that character. Now, again, everybody is going to portray NPCs different. Everybody GMs differently. A lot of GMs out there do not inhabit NPCs. They sort of GM from third person perspective. They say the NPC says this. That's perfectly fine too. But even in that case, to have a defining trait for an NPC really helps the players, I've found in my experience. Especially if it's a room full of NPCs, they're going to need sort of cues from you to know who's talking when. And yes, it's very easy to say Joe says this, then Sally says that, but I found it's better if you can give just a little flavor to each NPC so they can sort of lock it into their imaginations. It just helps them keep track of who's who, and that can be super simple. You know, maybe one character is always, pulling at his ear, like Carol Burnett or something like that. Or maybe another character is always sort of scowling. Maybe another NPC is always looking over their shoulders. Whatever the case is, maybe one's always fingering the hilt of their sword. Maybe one of them is really gregarious. There's literally an endless amount of NPC traits that you can apply. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It could literally be just one. In Savage Worlds, there is a table. I presume the table in the newest edition of Savage Worlds still exists, but it certainly was in the deluxe edition that I was using in season 1 of my show. But there's a table that is, I think it's 20 one-word descriptors of NPCs, and they're super, super, super simple. They're like happy, scared, treacherous, helpful, right? So in one of the first Savage Worlds games I ran, it was kind of a traveler kind of game, and they had a crew. And so I would just roll a d20 on that table to come up with the personality of the crewman. And in fact, that became their sort of de facto name too, which was, the engineer was happy. So every time I played the engineer, I always made him really happy. And as soon as the characters interact with the engineer, they were like, oh yeah, right, we're talking to Happy now. And then there was, the co-pilot was suspicious. And so the co-pilot would always be, oh yeah, what's that supposed to mean? And they'd know exactly who they're talking to. And that was just a one-word descriptor. So it's really, really, really helpful, I've found, to bring your players into the setting even more, just so they can lock in those NPCs and they can lock in their imaginations what those NPCs might look like or sound like or whatever. It's just, it all helps with the immersive quality that only role-playing games can give us. And as an addendum to that point, not every shopkeeper or town guard needs a story, certainly. A one-word trait is more than enough for most NPCs. And also it can be, if you have like a more theatrical GM, it could sort of turn into the GM show. Look at me take you through all the characters of the town when, it's, we want to know what happens to our players, our characters at the table. So just, go easy on that. But again, it's a spice you want to use sparingly, I would say. I would say that one of the most important things I've learned to do as a GM is to improvise in the moment, to be quick on my feet. Because if there's one universal truth of running a game, it is that, well, there are no universal truths, but if there was to be one universal truth, it would be that players will always surprise you. They will always come up with something that you didn't see coming. They will always come up with the most harebrained scheme. They will always run off with the craziest red herring you threw in just as a lark. They will fixate on the wrong thing. They will do this as much or more than they will fixate on the thing that they need to fixate on in order to, get through the scenario. But that's what players will do. They will they will surprise you. You want to be able to roll with the punches. You want to be able to invent things on the fly that are still consistent with your world, right? And I think the best way to do that is for you, for for you as a GM to really know your setting and to really know your NPCs if it's an NPC heavy scene. You do want to know your NPCs in your world well enough to be able to improvise a response when the players do something unexpected, because they absolutely will. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's a feature, not a bug. That's one of the great things about role-playing games, is that you don't have any control over what the players are going to do. And as a GM, I love that. I love the fact that they're going to surprise me. For me, there is no greater moment at the game table as a GM than having the moment of, wow, I totally did not see that coming. So yeah, learn to think on your feet. And it is a skill that takes time to develop, for sure. It's not something you learn overnight. Basically, there's an old rule in improv theater that says, say yes. And there is a similar philosophy that's been espoused in several sort of newer role-playing games. Say yes or roll the dice. I don't always agree with that particular philosophy. I think it's always context-based. It depends entirely on the situation. But overall, I think it's fairly good advice within reason. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to listen to their ideas and automatically make those ideas the right solution to the current dilemma. There are games that do that, and those can be effective sometimes. That's not how I normally run things, though. But do listen to them and do allow the world to respond to that. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how the world pushes here and the players push here, and it just creates a living feeling to the world. This goes into the next point, which I think is a really important point, certainly in my GMing over the years, and that is respect the player's agency. As the GM, you're in control of everything. You are literally God. You're all the gods. You are the world. You are the weather. You are every other sentient being in the world, in the setting. You are everything. You play everybody. But the players at your table, they only have one character to play, in most cases. They only play that character. So they are experiencing the game through the eyes of that character. So when they are taking action to overcome an obstacle, when they are doing anything to try and seize the moment, when they're doing something to try and advance the cause of the party or of the characters, that's their agency at work. And you don't want to shut that down. Again, you don't want to coddle them. You don't want to give them everything they ask for, but you don't want to shut them down because you have a particular way of seeing how a scenario is going to unfold. This is going to lead into a point in a second here, which is to a lot of people, a very controversial point, but we'll get to that one. Respecting the player's agency just means you are allowing them to try to change the status quo in the game world through their character's actions. And that's what the dice are for. That's what the system is for the characters to attempt those things to change the status quo. Because otherwise it would just be a story game where we all pass the stick and say, and then I do this, and then you do this. And that's not what a role-playing game is, because it's a role-playing game. And part of the game is the system of randomizers that exists in virtually all role-playing games in order to represent the chaos of the universe. That's my take on it anyway. When you roll a d20 to hit, that is that D20 is representing not just your skill and ability to hit your opponent, it is also representing the forces of chaos at work in the world that might thwart you or work against you. So if you roll a 1 on that D20, then that might represent the fact that you slipped on a patch of gravel at the worst possible moment to miss your opponent, right? So it's the forces of chaos at work. That is what rolling the dice means to me. And that's fine because it works in with player agency perfectly well. Players know when they're playing a role-playing game that they're not going to get everything they want, but they should feel that they can try to get everything the character wants through their agency and through the system of the game. I think it's good form as a GM to reinforce that in your players. I used to have a player, a great guy named Craig, who was convinced when I was running him in Warhammer Fantasy First Edition, was convinced that I was out to kill the party. And it was so funny because I kept saying to him, Craig, if I wanted the party dead, I could, blue bolts from heaven, come down, you're all dead. But what does that serve? How is that fun for me? I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for the party, which is also something that a lot of advice you see in a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games is to, root for the characters. And I do. I want them to succeed, but I'm not going to give it to them for free. That's what the game system is there for. The game system is there to challenge or to help challenge them mechanically for them to get what they want. So he was convinced that I was out to kill the party. And it used to make me laugh, but it also kind of broke my heart because I was like, no, dude, I want you to make your choices and to play the game and roll the dice and to achieve what your character wants. Nothing would make me happier. I'm just not going to give it to you for free. It's not Christmas. So anyway, whatever. The long-winded way of saying that, respect your players' agency. Let them try to change the world. That's going to make them feel like they're part of the world itself. This next point I think is really important to avoid GM burnout, which happens all the time, and that is change it up once in a while. If you can change your game system, or change the genre that you're playing, or even change like something as simple as the group size, that's going to make a big difference in the experience of the game. I like to change it up every now and then because, for one, there's way too many games I want to play to just be stuck with one. But also, it keeps me fresh. And when I change up elements of my game, whether that is even something, like I said, group size, something as simple as that. So maybe you have a group of 6 players. When you run a game for 6 players, it is a very, very different experience from 3 players. It's also a very different experience from 4 players. The difference between 3 players and 4 players is that 4 players means that you're very often going to have 2 against 2 in terms of decision making. Should we go right or left? 2 are going to say right, 2 are going to say left. But with 3 players, there's always a tiebreaker. So it's an interesting psychological thing about a group of 3 that I particularly love. For me personally, 1 GM of 3 players is the magic number. For me, that's always been pretty much always been the greatest campaign play with that particular configuration. But I digress on that. If you change it up, it's going to keep you sharp. It's going to keep you excited to look at new things. It's going to keep you, hopefully it'll prevent you from burning out. I mean, there's many methods of avoiding GM burnout. A lot of people say walk away for a while, become a player. I think that's pretty good advice. But change up your game if you can. A lot of you out there have a problem where you have players that only want to play D&D and you want to run something else. I've never been afflicted by that problem. I've always had very, very encouraging players who wanted to try new things, and they're very, very quick to pick up new game systems and stuff. So if you are in that position, you have my sympathies, because that sucks. I mean, in my situation, if I wanted to play a new game, I said, hey guys, guess what? I've got this game. I'm going to run it. And they all said, okay. And then we ran it, had a blast. But I read so much about people who do not have that, where their players, no, we don't want to learn anything new. I don't know what to tell you. Every group's different, and every player group is different. Every personality is different. But I have found in my experience that it doesn't take much to convince them to try something new. And there's many ways of doing it. You see a lot of people going from D&D to Pathfinder right now, for example. Probably because Pathfinder is so similar to D&D structurally and rules-wise that maybe those players think, okay, well, we'll make that shift. But, don't get us going to Mutant Year Zero. That's a dice pool game, and I'll never be able to figure that one out. That is a mentality that I've never understood at all. Again, I don't know what to tell you. I would say actually find a different group. I'm not saying you have to abandon your current group. I would say that now in this age of technology, you have more opportunities than ever to join different groups as a player even. At the very least, it gives you a taste of something different. And that really is the point of this particular point, is change it up every now and then, because it can only make you fresher. It can only sharpen your tools. You're always going to learn something by changing it up, whether that's system or setting or players or what have you. This last one could be considered controversial by a lot of people. And that is, if I had some advice to give to newer GMs, especially, the job of a GM is not really to tell a story. And I know I can hear the internet breaking right now. Oh my goodness, what are you saying? I hear this a lot. People saying, oh, well, my GM's story, or a GM will say, oh, well, in the story I want to tell. And it's nails on a chalkboard every time I hear that. Now, I understand what they're saying, and I understand why they're saying it. For many years, as a young GM, I thought that was the best way to run a role-playing game, was to tell a story. I had this epic story I wanted to tell, and the players were going to be part of that, and they were going to experience it. And oh my God, we were going to get to the big, awesome climax, and it was going to be great. And sometimes it was. But more often than not, it was very frustrating, because the players, as we've already discussed, have agency. And sometimes the players are going to do things. More often than you would expect, the players are going to do things that you don't expect. And that could throw a big old wrench into your planned story. And if you don't know how to improvise around that, you're in big trouble. I have been in many games where there was a story. We were running through the GM's story. And yes, it was grand and epic. But at the very end, I did something that was unexpected, and the GM didn't know how to handle it, and so I got completely ripped off by the end of that. I'm not going to go into details about the particular game, but just suffice to say that I had a very, very, very disappointing experience because my agency as a player was shut down in favor of the GM's story, and that's always bugged me. And it bugged me that I did that to players too. I did terrible things to players in order to facilitate my story, because my epic story. And I think that what that does, it really doesn't utilize the most powerful aspect of role-playing games. Because if you think about it, role-playing games are unlike any other form of entertainment. They're not just passive entertainment. They're not like a movie or a TV show or reading a book. They are active entertainment where the players are both the spectators and the participants. There is nothing out there that I can think of that's like that. So because they're spectators and participants, their status as participant has to be respected. Again, their agency has to be respected. And if you have a story, that automatically means that you know what's going to happen. That's going to kill their agency, or at the very least curtail it in a way that could be extremely frustrating. So my philosophy is, my job isn't to tell a story. My job is to set up the world, set up NPCs, and set up situations that are going to provide obstacles for the player characters. That's it. That's my job. Because if I do that, I know that when the players are going to pursue their agendas, it's going to push against that world. I sound like a broken record here, but it's going to push against that world, and the world is going to push back. And how do I know how that world's going to push back? Because I've set up the setting, the NPCs, and the obstacles in the player's path. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know what the story is going to be. For me, I want to be as surprised by the outcome of a session as my players are. I really do. I don't want to know what's going to happen when I sit down. So, I'll still have set piece encounters, for sure. I'll have these big, big epic set pieces, but the difference is that I set them up. I do not finish them. I do not assume a conclusion. I think about the possible conclusions. I think about all the ways that they might end up, and I keep myself light on my toes and on my feet, ready to improvise something else that the players try, because of course they're going to surprise me. But I don't plan an end, because if I plan an end, then I'm going to, and again, this is me I'm talking about. I'm not saying you do this. I'm saying this is me. If I plan an end, I know that subconsciously I'm going to try and funnel the players to that end despite their agency, despite their characters' choices. And I do not want to do that to them. I want them to be able to influence the world in a way that is surprising to both them and me. So every time I hear Storyteller, which I know is like World of Darkness, and World of Darkness, that's the actual name of the GM, is Storyteller. They call it the Storyteller system, and yet it's anything but a storyteller system, which is also interesting, but that's beside the point in this video. I maintain that for me, the job of the GM is not to tell a story. It is to participate in an evolving story with the players. My job is to set up the world, to set up the NPCs, to know that the NPCs are taking action and hatching plots. Oh yes, absolutely. My NPCs are very active in the background. They're always doing things, and I always try and make sure that they're doing things that are going to interfere with the players' agendas, because that's going to create the conflict, see? And that's going to get the player characters involved and caring about what's going on, because now these NPCs are screwing with their plans, and then they're going to take effort and make the effort to go after these NPCs, and look at that, you've got conflict, you've got a campaign. How it ends, I don't know. And that's what I love. So a lot of people are very upset when I say this, that the job of a GM is not to be a storyteller. But again, this is not commandments from on high. If you fundamentally disagree with that, that's fine. You're someone on the internet. That's your job. That's your actual job. It's to fundamentally disagree with other people on the internet. It's fine. If you are a GM that's running stories for your characters and they love it and they keep coming back, congratulations. That's awesome. I had that too, until the day that I didn't. Until the day that I kind of realized I was bored by that. I was bored by knowing the ending. I didn't want to know the ending anymore. And the only way to not know the ending is to trust the process, to trust that you are doing your job of creating a setting and NPCs and NPCs who want things and throwing obstacles in the way of the characters, and trusting that the players are doing their jobs of pursuing their own characters' agendas. If you do that, then chances are you're going to have a pretty good experience. That's no guarantee. None of these things are going to guarantee a good game. I've gone over the course of this video a number of things that have worked for me over the past 40 years. There's no guarantee they're going to work for you, but I think they're pretty tried and tested around a lot of tables all over the world. So let me know if you've had experience with some of the stuff that I've talked about here. Let me know in the comments below. Or if you have, things that I haven't necessarily touched on. There's a million things I haven't touched on. Obviously, I just sort of picked a few things at random to talk about. But general GM philosophies that have made your games better for both you and your players. I'd love to read about them in the comments below. Other than that, thanks for watching. And for those of you who are going to be attending Gen Con 2023 this year, I will see you there at the Columbia Games booth. Otherwise, thanks for watching and joining me here today. And if you want to help support the channel, you can do so either by joining our Patreon or joining the YouTube channel membership or buying some merchandise off of memyselfandie.com or buying some drive-thru RPG products through the links in the description below. Thank you for joining me here in this video, and I will see you next time on Me, Myself, and Die.